welcome to this panel and unordinary phase out of coal-fired power plants and how carbon credit can contribute to the clean energy transition in emerging market and developing economies. My name is Ryo Yamasaki, and I am working for the Energy Investment Unit at the IEA, and I'm pleased to facilitate this panel. The session will start with a set of the 4 interventions from speakers, which will be followed by an interactive discussion with all participants. To participate in the discussion, you're welcome to intervene by raising your hand in room or virtually. And please wait for the moderator to give you the floor. You're also welcome to send any question you have during the presentations via Zoom chat. And finally, I remind you that these discussions are held under the Chatham House rule, meaning that any remark made during the discussion are not to be attributed to individual participants. And before we have speakers' intervention, just let me talk for scene setting and why we choose this topic. So coal is continuing to be the largest source of CO2 emission in the fossil fuels. And addressing the emission reduction from coal would be one of the most important actions. However, this doesn't mean the process of reduction is simple. According to IEA's recent publication, Coal Mid-Year Update, 2023 coal demand reaches a new record of 8.7 billion tons. As you know, the world's largest producer and consumer is China, who takes over 50% of demand. And another around 20% demand comes from India and ACEN countries who also need to manage their energy and electricity securities to meet their energy demand increase from industries and other places. That means when we address the emission reduction from coal, we also need to think about alternative power supply with a clean energy perspective for the region and also just energy transition for emerging and developing economies as well. In addition, it usually takes 20 to 30 years for coal-fired plants to recover the invested capital. However, the plants in developing economies in Asia are on average under 15 years old. So many have not yet recovered their capital investments. And these situations show how complex the problem is, and therefore innovative solutions are needed to address the emission. In IEA's another report, Accelerating Just Transition for the Coal Sector in March showed 4 approaches to address the emission reduction from coal. So one is repurposing plants to provide load balancing service rather than base load power, and retrofitting coal plants with CCUS technology, or co-firing with low emission fuels such as ammonia or biomass, and retiring a plant early and converting existing sites for low emission powers. So today we will mainly focus on early retirement, and we'd like to talk about the initiatives to combine it with the carbon market. So measuring the emission reduction from early retirement and issuing carbon credits for that. We think our 4 speakers' initiatives are definitely leading the world discussion, and we hope that today's presentation discussions will deepen our understanding of how we can tackle this problem. So next, we would like to welcome Mr. Eric Francia as a second speaker. So Eric is President and CEO of ACEN Corporation and serves on its board of directors. He is also a senior managing director and member of the management committee of Ayala Corporation. Under his leadership, Ayala established its energy platform from standing start in 2011 to become one of the largest renewable energy platforms in the region. He had also led pioneering initiative in early coal retirement, including the successful completion of the world's first market-based energy transition mechanism. Eric, over to you.
Thank you, Ryo-san, and pleasant day to everyone. Happy to share with you our experience in energy transition and this pioneering initiative on transition credits in partnership, collaboration with MAS and 3CI, among others. But first, perhaps, let me just give a brief introduction of the company. ACEN Corporation is the listed energy platform of the Ayala Group, which is one of the largest and most diversified conglomerates in the Philippines. Ayala celebrating its 190th anniversary this year, quite amazing longevity. We have core businesses, Ayala, in real estate, banking, telecoms, among others. but ACEN is the youngest among the core businesses of Ayala. As Ria mentioned, I started the business just 13 years ago in 2011. Currently, ACEN has close to 7,000 megawatts of renewables in operations, under construction, and signed agreements or won bids for power purchase agreements. We are focused on Asia Pacific. Our headquarters, our core market is in the Philippines, which accounts for about 40% of our capacity. But we have significant presence in Indonesia and Vietnam, as well as India and Australia, and emerging presence in Laos, which is also serving the Vietnamese market. Focused on solar and wind, and increasingly scaling up energy storage, which will be a critical part of this transition. It didn't start this way. Just to give you a context of our energy transition journey, we started in 2011 from literally 0 megawatts. We wanted to be sustainable, renewables focused. Our first investment was a modest 33 megawatt investment, 50% ownership stake in a wind farm in the Philippines, first in Southeast Asia. That was in 2011, $10 million of equity investment. We were aspiring to deploy $1 billion of capital in the energy business. We quickly realized that renewables was not going to help address the needs of the Philippines at the time. This was 13 years ago. What the Philippines needed was reliable and affordable energy to support its expected significant economic growth. And so therefore, we made that painful decision to go and focus on building coal-fired power plants in our first 5 years. So the good news was we were able to scale the business, scale the platform to over 1,000 megawatts, and made a difference in the country to address their needs. We enabled about 2,000 megawatts worth of power plants. That's the good news. The not so good news is that our portfolio was 93% coal and 7% renewables. But in 2016, 2017, we felt the groundswell on renewables and ESG investing. ESG was becoming more and more mainstream. Renewables was getting more competitive and scalable, and yet coal plants were fetching at high valuations. So we made that strategic pivot in 2017 and decided to get out of coal, to start divesting our coal plants and investing 100% of the proceeds to expand renewables, not only in the Philippines, but across the region. And that's why you'll see in the last 7 years, we've transformed the company from 70 megawatts of renewables in 2016 to close to 7,000 megawatts, 100-fold growth over the last 7 years, enabled in part by the divestment of coal plants. And of course, tapping the capital markets and some partners. GIC, for example, of Singapore, is an investor in ACEN. Now, as we were divesting our coal plants, we got called out by some of our ESG investors and said, Eric, while it's good that you're getting out of coal and scaling renewables, aren't you passing the problem to somebody else? The emissions problem. And that's true. That gave us a pause and a problem, a dilemma. If we divest, we're going to pass the problem to somebody else. That doesn't seem to be extremely responsible. If we keep the coal plant, investors who were very sensitive to ESG considerations will not put money, capital in the platform. So how can we achieve our aspirational growth? And if we shut it down overnight, we'll be crucified by our shareholders, our customers, and the government. So we're thankful that in 2021, the Asian Development Bank started pushing the notion of energy transition mechanism, which was new to us and new to the region at the time. We love the idea, call up our friends at ADB to seek clarifications, guidance. We realized that they will be focusing on Indonesia, which is a market at scale, and that we were too small to be considered as a pilot at the time. And so we decided to do it onshore in the Philippines and managed to move quickly and get a handful of banks and insurance companies and other investors to take out the debt and the equity with a commitment on our part to retire and transition the plant by 2040, which is after 25 years of operations. This is a new plant. This is one of those plants that's under 15 years old, that's driving the average 2 to 15 years old. The plant was put on commercial operations in 2015. So at that time, it was 7 years old. And we said, I'm sorry, but we'll draw the line in the sand and you will only operate until age 25. As you know, coal plants typically reach 40 to 50 years of age. So there was additionality there, and that was our commitment. Now, having said that, the ADB pointed out to the IEA data that for the world to keep to the 1.5 degree target, more than 50% of coal emissions must be reduced between 2022 and 2030. And we said, how can we accelerate what we thought was already an aggressive retirement date of 2040 or 25 years of operations? We're going to face a huge write-off issue, among others, and power shortage issue. The Philippines is currently experiencing very tight supply supply issues. But having said that, we said, okay, what we'll do is that we will give ourselves the option to reacquire the plant as early as 2030 or as late as 2040, so that we'll be able to enable the early retirement of the coal plant. So the 2040 is a commitment on our part. If the current owner does not shut down the plant, we will. We have that call option. But we have the option, not the obligation, to reacquire the plant as early as 2030 in case the right mechanism emerges to make the early coal retirement and transition make sense. And at the time when we talked about that option, in my mind, the only way that we can do this is through carbon credits for early coal retirement. And unfortunately, at the time, there was nothing. There's no mechanism. And frankly, it was surprising to me because it's, in my mind, an obvious choice to shut down the plant, replace it with clean and reliable energy. It achieves the same outcome as a CCUS, where you continue producing the 1.7 billion kilowatt hours of output, and you eliminate with 100% certainty the 1.9 million tons of emissions that the coal plant emits. How different is that from an outcomes perspective between this transition credit that we're talking about and CCUS? If you look at the metrics, it's exactly the same. Perhaps with one difference, there's going to be no leakage when you shut down a coal plant. So we were very fortunate that in 9 months after we closed the ETM deal, as Pamela mentioned, MAS, together with Coal to Clean Credit Initiative of Rockefeller Foundation, MAS commissioned this study by McKinsey and announced and started pushing the notion of transition credits. It was a dream come true for us, and said finally somebody was also thinking about this, what seems to be a very low-hanging fruit. And so it didn't take much time for us to be connected. And in 3 months' time, so we met in July, August of 2023, and by December at COP28 in Dubai, we announced a collaboration to pursue transition credits, with our project being the pilot of one of the 2 pilots that's sponsored or being promoted by no less than MAS. For that, we're very thankful. Now, just to give you a little bit of a substance or color on what the project entails, really the way I think about this is in 3 different work streams, just to try to simplify this. The first 2 really are what we also call as the uses of funding, and then the third would be the partial source of funding. So the first work stream here really is the coal-fired power plant transition. There are 3 components here. Number 1, we need to ensure that all stakeholders are kept whole. The debt and equity investors, the customers or the off-taker, the community, and the workers. We need to make sure that no one gets left behind. So we are developing robust programs and approaches and quantifying what it takes to enable keeping the stakeholders whole. Number two, we are also going to undertake an asset repurposing activity, a study. We will have to determine after the coal plant is retired what would be the best use. And responsible decommissioning, of course, you need to make sure that there's no chance that the coal plant will be reactivated. So basically, the idea here is to accelerate the retirement of the coal plant from 2040, which is already a commitment on our part, to as early as 2030. So that really reduces emissions by 10 years times 1.9 million tons, or roughly 19 million tons. Now, we need to replace this with a clean energy replacement, which is workstream 2. And this is developing a reliable, renewable energy at scale. So we need to replace the 1.7 billion kilowatt hours of output of coal plant with the same level of output, even if the methodology of Vera, for example, allows, the draft methodology at least, allows less than 1-to-1 pairing. We believe that in the case of the Philippines, in the context of the Philippines, for us, the responsible thing to do is to replace it on a 1-to-1 basis. We also believe that we need to replace this on a firm basis, meaning to say we don't want to replace it with intermittent variable renewables like solar and wind. We need to make, because that disrupts the grid significantly. That will just put constraints on the grid. It does not help. So what we will do is to convert that into a dispatchable, reliable, renewable energy, which I will discuss in a bit. Now, both of these will entail costs. This clean energy replacement is expensive. I can show you the data in a bit. But we need to make sure that the transition is just, so we are replacing the coal output with clean, reliable, and affordable energy. And that affordability needs some subsidy that will come from these transition credits, which brings us to the third work stream, which is the transition credits itself. If we're successful in doing this transition, then that would hopefully create these carbon credits. It will be under Article 6 with corresponding adjustments. We'll anchor this on the compliance market. We're fortunate that Singapore, while modest in size, has already an established carbon market with transparent carbon price and so forth. And this will enable the project. And we believe that the Singapore carbon tax range of about 50 to 80 Singapore dollars, which is around 36 to 60 US dollars per ton starting in 2030s, will be adequate enough, subject to further diligence and studies, but we believe that this is adequate to enable the project. So in terms of the clean energy replacement, this is the profile of the coal plant, about 1.8 billion kilowatt hours of net output, emissions of about 1.9 million, as I mentioned earlier. And the levelized cost of electricity of that is just under 9 US cents or $90 per megawatt hour. We will replace that with, to replace that with a like-for-like baseload plant 24/7 is going to be very expensive. And frankly speaking, not necessary in the context of the Philippines. What we believe, because Philippines has very high usage on a 12-hour, what we call the mid-merit, we believe as the off-taker of the plant, we are okay serving our customers and taking 400 megawatt mid-merit plant, which is an integrated renewables and energy storage, or an IRES plant, which is behind it is 1,400 megawatts of solar and 1,600 megawatt hours of battery. So we will have 12 hours per day output, the same energy output throughout the year. This will not disrupt the grid, but the CapEx is still expensive. It's expensive not only because of battery storage. Battery storage is declining in price, but it still adds to the cost. What's also expensive is in the Philippines. I think this is one of the nuances in the power industry. In markets like India, Middle East, Australia, renewables is cheap because resources are strong, land is vast and relatively flat, and therefore you get relatively low cost of renewables. In the Philippines, land is limited, as in the case of Vietnam. Resource is not that strong in Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Land is not as abundant. You have to avoid agricultural land. You have to avoid forest land. So what we're left with are very challenging land where you have to invest in access infrastructure like roads, bridges, dikes, flood protection, and the like, because this is typically in the mountains, and transmission connectivity. So this adds to the cost of battery storage. Solar is cheap. We all know that, but what's not highlighted are the other costs. Land is also not becoming cheap. So long story short, the levelized cost of electricity of renewables in an integrated fashion with storage is about just under 15 US cents per kilowatt hour, $150 per megawatt hour. So there is that gap, and therefore this would need some support through the transition credits. So in summary, really, this project is well underway. We have good momentum. This forum has been very helpful for me. We're relatively new in this carbon space. We're just used to selling CERs and VERs, and that's it. We're very unsophisticated, but we are learning a lot. I take direct personal interest in this. That's why I'm here. I'd like to understand these nuances. But we hope that this is going to be the start of something that can scale. Number one, I want to reiterate Pamela's point that this is going to be high integrity. I think this is what the system lacks now, and that needs to be addressed. So this is going to be under Article 6. We're going to go beyond the baseline methodology. This will be at scale. I know we talked about cook stoves and so forth, which has its own challenges to scale, but this one, if one project alone has a quite significant scale, it is imminent. This is 2030. We're not talking about 2040. I think we have just the right timeline to prepare for this massive project and pilot. But I think one of the most important points here is we want this to be replicable and scalable on a global basis. And hopefully this could be a catalyst that it can be done. Hopefully it can address the pain points that we discussed, which is, my concern really is we need to make sure that there's a market for this, both on the demand side and the supply side. Article 6 is relatively new. Hopefully, other governments like Singapore will open their carbon markets and enable very compelling projects such as these so that we can really attain scale and replicability and really accelerate this energy transition. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Eric. That's a wonderful presentation for showing the ATM's mechanism and detail. And so before moving to the next presentation, if you have a quick clarification question, please raise your hand. And we know there are one question in the Zoom chat, but I think it is good for the ask in the discussion part. So if you can keep that for the discussion, it is very helpful. So is there any question? Yeah.
Thanks. I'm Mr. I'm Taewon Kim, came from the K Water, the biggest renewable energy producer in of South Korea. We are specialized in the floating solar PV project. I would like to ask Mr. Eric. You mentioned the Philippines has some problems there because comparing to the Australia. Your country and our country is very small and very narrow territory. So to address these problems, we address this problem by utilizing or promoting floating solar PV systems to minimize the use of seizure of the land. So I just want to know, your company is considering the solar PV system as an alternative, the use or how can I say, make the solar PV project cost a little lower. Thanks.
Yes, we're definitely also considering or looking at floating solar. We're comparing the costs between floating solar and ground-mounted solar. Even if we have a floating solar project, for example, in Laguna de Bay, which is at the heart of Greater Manila. It's a 90,000 hectare lake, and we won around 800 hectares of water rights on that lake, which will enable about 1,000 megawatts of solar. We consider that as a potential solution for the clean energy replacement. But when we look at the cost of that relative to our other project on land, albeit in the mountains, like 300 meters above sea level, the cost is still slightly cheaper for the ground-mounted solar as opposed to the at-scale floating solar. And one of the reasons is because it's a very large lake. There's a lot of waves, and you need to invest in wave attenuation infrastructure. So, but certainly for Philippines, bigger picture, we should utilize the water surface, given that we have limitations on land, be it floating solar or be it offshore wind. The Department of Energy is very much at the forefront of building that the offshore wind ecosystem and policies in the Philippines as well. But certainly, it should be part of the solution if we are to reach these low emissions or zero emissions grid. We do need long-term contracts for the project to succeed. We're not in the business of taking market risk on carbon credits. So from a point of view of a renewable proponent, to do this transition from coal to clean, we need certainty of price and volume. And given that this is going to be a crediting period over 10 years, annual cash flows over 10 years, again, this is an ecosystem approach. I think we've been approached already. I think Traction is raising this, the possible securitization of these cash flows. So there is a lot of different players who can help address that issue. On the second point, I couldn't agree more with the caution on CCS and ammonia with respect to the use case for coal plants. And that is why for this 2030 transition credits project, we elected to do the more low-hanging fruit, the more practical approach, which is retire the coal plant early and replace it with reliable, dispatchable, and hopefully affordable renewable energy. If this were 2040, we would give the world the benefit of the doubt that maybe 15 years is still a long time for technology to advance, but we don't have 15 years in the case of 2030. So, and we needed to write the project design document and what clean energy replacement. It's I think the answer is obvious that we'll go for the IRES or integrated renewables and energy storage. Scope 3, that's one of the things that's still a mystery to me, and I'm glad that people are as confused as I am in terms of cracking the nut on this one. Perhaps, Tom, this is one of the key topics for next year, alongside with Article 6. I really wonder how Singapore can open its carbon borders. So we'll talk about compliance and voluntary market, which I think is the intention to create this market at scale. How can other governments open their borders as well and support these ITMOs under projects under Article 6, these high quality, high integrity projects, right? Because I think that's a relatively low-hanging fruit. That's oversimplifying things. I heard about the political underpinnings of Article 6 and so forth. But hopefully, this is something that can be addressed, discussed, and in the next 12, 18 months. Certainly, we are hoping that a number of jurisdictions will support this, Singapore plus a few others, just to get the ball rolling. And on the corporate side, to Joe's point, again, the specific use case for carbon credits for these corporates, I know we're going to pilot something with one of the corporate buyers for insetting and so forth. So we just need to understand more how it works, what's the use case, and hopefully can replicate this as well. But my beef there is, insetting versus offsetting. That's what I heard the buzzword last week in New York. But isn't, at the risk of sounding naive, doesn't carbon emissions have no borders? I mean, you emit, it affects the whole world, not just your country. So why do we really need to focus on specific value chain and so forth, right? It's like complicating our lives. We can simplify this. Again, I'm being naive here because I'm new to the space, but again, I think there's a little bit of feeling as a pragmatist of splitting hairs between insetting and offsetting, because at the end of the day, it's outcomes that we're concerned about. Yes, I agree about integrity and so forth, but let's call spade a spade. What is the issue? As long as the project is high integrity and there are safeguards, etc., what's really the difference between insetting and offsetting if the outcomes are the same for the world, right? So again, something that perhaps can be tabled for next year.
Thank you.